Okay, good evening and welcome back. So I hope everybody had a pretty good weekend. And yeah, so we got this meeting, and then there's no make sure you note there's no meeting next week because of spring break, and so we'll have a 2 week break again, and then we'll meet back on the following Monday. So today is the 8th, I believe, week 6. All right, so we got today's meeting, and then no meeting next week, spring break. And then we'll meet back on the 22nd. So it seems like a ways away, but we have a week off here for spring break. So just a reminder, I sent you an email, and most of you already sent me your midterm, but the midterm one is due today via email. So get that in if you haven't already, or send me an email. So midterm one, and also the chapter 5 homework, that's also due today. So these two things both due today, and so I've already got most of those from all the students, but just a reminder on those things. And then today, we're going to go ahead and jump to the next kind of section, so after the midterm. And so this class is not, the exams or the material is not cumulative, I guess. And so the second third of the class, like the second 2/3, all this stuff will go on the second exam. So all of this stuff, chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, and 16, that's going to be the material for the second midterm. So the exams are not cumulative, and so everything that's been tested on midterm 1 won't really be tested again. So we'll do all new stuff starting tonight. So I think we'll do chapter 6 today. Yeah, and that's what I think. We'll finish this up, and then after your spring break, we'll jump back into it and do chapter 7 and 8 in a couple weeks. All right. So unless there's no questions on the midterm or any of the chapter 5 homework material, we'll go ahead and start on chapter 6. Okay. All right, so and also for this chapter, you'll notice that the homework forms are here. Chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we've already done. I don't have a homework for chapter 6, which was the chapter we're doing today. So it's kind of a technical chapter. And so the good news is, once you get your chapter 5 homework and your midterm in, that's all the work I need from you until after the spring break. So assuming you get your midterm and your chapter 5 homework in, no homework over spring break, so you can just, I'm sure you got stuff to do. I don't know, catch up on your other classes or spend time with your family, go to Cancun. I don't know what you're going to do, but anyway, won't have any homework for chapter 6. Okay, so all right, so we did this stuff for the first midterm, and then they're kind of grouped into sections. So the next section will be the study guides for chapters 6 through 9 and 16, and all this material will be for the preparing for the next midterm. So let's go ahead and open up the chapter 6 with notes and solutions. All right, and then you can open up this thing, the examples for chapter 6. Okay, and then the PowerPoint as well for chapter 6. Okay, so make sure they're grouped in like reverse order. So don't open up the one for chapter 16, even though it looks like that's the first one. So chapter 6 down here at the bottom under per midterm 2. So it goes like 6, 7, 8, 9, 16. So here's the right one. Okay, and again, no homework for chapter 6, so we don't have to worry about that today. And then this week I'll update your homework grades, and I'll post some more solutions for the chapters 4 and 5 homeworks as well. Okay. All right, so chapter 6 is, like I said, more of a technical chapter that's going to kind of set up more interesting stuff in the coming chapters. Um, I guess I'll be honest, not the most interesting material this chapter. It's a lot of definitions and quick identities, but it's very important in setting up the different types of markets and everything else for the rest of the material for midterm 2. So we'll look at some more all different types of markets in chapters 7, 8, 9. But this, kind of a lot of technical things we need to cover, some graphs, some definitions, but a lot of important stuff here, but probably not the most exciting chapter. But anyway, I'll try to make it exciting. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk. So now we're moving. Let's see. Thus far, we did kind of an intro. We did supply and demand and elasticity, which are two big microeconomic things. And then we finished off last week with market failures, public goods, externalities. So those are kind of the main things on the consumer side for microeconomics. And most of the stuff, chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9, is going to move to the firm side or the production side. And we're going to look at different types of production, different types of markets, and kind of look at firm behavior and how they make decisions depending on the type of market that they're in. And so I think when we do like monopoly and monopolist and competition in the different types of markets, that stuff is, I think you'll find it very interesting. And so this is kind of a backbone for that. But once we start learning about different types of markets, it's pretty fun. So this chapter is just about businesses and kind of their cost of production, so different terms, and what that means for the firm's decisions. Okay, so let's first make the distinction in microeconomics of short run versus long run. All right, so there's a short run period and a long run period, and they don't necessarily have to do with time. They have to do with what the firm, how quickly the firm can make adjustments. And so let's look at slides 2 and 8 and see if we can uncover the difference between short run versus long run in terms of how the firms make their decisions. All right, so first, just a few definitions. So in this sense, or in this chapter, a plant is going to be any of these things. So any of the things that go into the production process, like well, not in the production process, but any like all the items of capital, I guess. So factories, farms, mines, stores, websites, warehouses. So like any building structure, any website, any like brick and mortar structure, or any tech, any of the capital that goes into the techie stuff too. That's going to be the plant. And so put all these things in that category. So a plant consists of any one or more of these things, or in anything else that fits in this category. So a firm is going to operate one or more plants. So a firm could operate, a really small business can have just one store. A small business can have two stores, and you can have, depending on the size of the firm, they can have a bunch of stores, a bunch of websites, a bunch of farms, a bunch of warehouses, etc. But one firm has to operate at least one plant, And if you're looking at, bigger, you're looking at like Amazon or Target, they have, millions of, probably millions of plants if you put all these things together. And then an industry is going to be a group of firms that produce the same product. So there's like uh, I don't know, there's a smartphone industry, there's a social media industry, there's a farming industry, there's a restaurant industry, there's a laundromat industry. So if you put them into the same industry, that comprises all the firms that operate the plants in that industry. So kind of a breakdown where like industry is the big picture, firm is operating, depending on the size of that firm, one or more plants, and a plant consists of any of these things and probably a whole bunch of others. So any of the brick and mortar things and any of the techie things go into the definition of a plant. All right, so understanding what a plant means in this sense, that'll help us understand short run periods versus long run periods. So again, this don't think of this just as time. It really depends on how quick the firm can make adjustments. So the short run period, we have some variable inputs, but fixed plant. So in the short run period, uh, essentially what the key thing is in the short run, firms can make labor changes. So they can add more, they can hire workers, they can fire workers, they can change their hours, they can do things with labor hours. But all of the plant things um, are fixed in the short run. So okay, so that's really the big distinction. If you can put uh, all those things in the plant category, what short run really means is labor is variable, so the firms can always make labor changes. They can add hours, they can add workers, they can lay off workers, they can do anything that has to do with changes in labor hours. But all the plant things are going to be assumed to be fixed in the short run. Now, in the long run, everything can be changed. So in the long run, you can, where's that slide? In the long run, you can build a new factory. You can start a new farm. You can build a new website. You can construct a new warehouse. You can make any of these changes in the long run. But in the short run, these things are fixed. Okay, so it's really going to depend on the type of the firm, the industry, and how long the short run versus the long run is. The short run could be very quick if you can make those adjustments quickly. So if you're in just a tech-based company or an app-based company, all your long run change or all your plant changes involve just some coding or some new app. Maybe you can do that very quickly. So in some industries, the long run is a much quicker period, but in some industries like farming, the long run is 6 months or a year. So it depends on the industry, but the qualifier here is that in the short run period, only labor can be changed. In the long run period, everything can be changed, labor and plants. So in the long run, all inputs are variable, which includes plants and labor. Okay, and then also in the long run, very importantly, firms can enter and exit. So the only thing that happens in the short run is you can change labor, labor hours, and everything that involves labor. Uh, Entry, exit, and plant changes are all occurring in the long run. Okay, so that's the distinction. And again, think of it as industry specific, not a period of time. So long run isn't like a year or 6 months. It's how quickly firms can enter and exit, and how quickly firms can make changes to plants. So that's the distinction. Okay. Now, given that distinction, all of the, I guess, all the fun stuff occurs in the short run. And so pretty much all of these definitions and all these applications apply to short run decisions where firms can enter and exit. And so all these, yeah, all of this stuff we're going to talk about now, we're going to assume we're in the short run period, and because that's where firms make profits. That's where firms take losses. And in the long run, everything kind of works out. Firms enter and exit and make plan adjustments. But most of this stuff that we're going to talk about in Chapter 6, let's assume that we're in the short run period. Okay, so we know what short run versus long run is now. And now let's look at, so now we're in the short run. Let's talk about short run production decisions, assuming that we're in the short run where plants are fixed, there's no entry and exit, and only labor can be changed. Okay. All right. So slide 9 is going to show us a couple or I guess 3 definitions, not a couple. Total product, marginal product, and average product. So let's go ahead and go there. All right. So you're going to get a bunch of quick definitions and like formulas, I guess, in this chapter. You don't have to memorize any of these things, but it's important to know what they are and what they imply. So total product is just the total amount of product, like the total number of units or the total amount of output that each firm produces. Okay, so like if you're looking at I don't know, if you're looking at a shoe company, total product is how many total pairs of shoes they produce. Okay. Now marginal product is how total product changes when you change labor by 1 unit. So if you add 1 hour of labor, what's the resulting change in total product? And this will depend on where you are in the production process. But the marginal product is always when you change labor by 1 unit, what's the marginal change in total product? So if you add 1 hour, do you produce 100 more pairs of shoes? Do you produce 10 more pairs of shoes, etc.? So the change in the margin when you add 1 more unit of labor is the marginal product. All right, then average product. So average product is just the total product you're at divided by how many units of labor you've produced. So if you produced 1,000 units and that took you 1,000 units of labor, then the average product is 1. So one unit of labor gives you 1 product. So just depending on where you are in the production process, divide the total amount of product you produced by the total amount of labor you've used, and that's your average. So how much product have you gotten on average with that much labor? Okay, so just some simple definitions: total product, marginal product, and average product. Okay, let's talk about now about how the marginal product essentially changes depending on where you are in the production process for a specific type of firm. So you might have heard of this concept of diminishing returns, and so it's very important in microeconomics, and we're going to talk about that now. But the law of diminishing returns relates directly to marginal product. Okay, and so I'm sure you've heard this term before, and it's probably been used incorrectly whenever you've heard it. So you'll hear a lot of like, I don't know, you could just be watching like a sports game, and you'll hear like a diminishing returns comment, which doesn't really use the term correctly. And so the point of it is that depending on where you are, the marginal change is different, and that change decreases over time. So let's look at slides 10 to 12. All right. So let's assume that for the purpose of this concept, the resources are of equal quality. So if we're looking at, we're trying to illustrate the point of diminishing returns. So let's assume that across the industry, like across the shoe industry, everyone has the same resources for now, or the same quality of resources. Let's assume technology is fixed for now. Okay, technology changes occur in the long run. We're in the short run. Okay, and variable resources are added to fixed resources. So what that means is that we're in the short run period, and the only variable resource is labor. And we're adding that resource to fixed resources, which are the plants. So, oops, not that. Okay, so these things are all fixed in the short run, but labor can change. So you'll see quickly how diminishing returns occur, because if you only have a certain number of factories, farms, mines, websites, whatever, uh, if you have no labor, then putting workers to these plants are very productive, but there's only so much work that can go around. And so if these things are fixed, then adding more and more labor and labor to it, you're going to get diminishing returns, because eventually the work gets used up, and the marginal worker isn't as productive because there's only so much work that more labor can add to fixed plant resources, right? Okay, so the idea here is that you're adding variable resources, labor, to those fixed resources, which are any of the plants. Okay, and then the idea is that at some point, the marginal product will fall. All right, and that's because, again, you're adding a variable change, labor, to some fixed capital, right? And so if you look at it like on the next slide here, it'll make a lot of sense. So I'll try to make an example of a specific industry, but this is just some ambiguous industry. So in column 1 here is the units of labor. So this is 1 unit of labor. Just you can think of it as like hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever, or just 1 unit. And this is the total product, column 2. Okay, so you see, if there's no labor, there's no product. All right, then if you add 1 unit of labor, you produce 10 units of the product. If you add 2 units of labor, 25 units of total product. All right, and then 3 and so on. So see how each time you add a unit of labor, you get more total product. But that only occurs at the beginning stages of the production. So see how the marginal change from going from 0 to 1 is 10. Okay, you went from 0 to 10. And then the marginal change going from 1 to 2 is 15. And then it's 25, or then it's 20. So in this little section, in the first 3 units of labor, your total product is increasing. And that should make total sense, because when you start adding little amounts of labor to some fixed resources, they're very productive because there's tons of work to be done. But then you keep adding more labor, 4 units, 5 units, and they add more product, but it's less productive. So from going from 3 to 4, the marginal change goes from 20 to 15. And then going from 4 to 5, the marginal change goes from 15 to 10. And see how each additional unit after some point is productive, but less productive. And then there's also a turning point. In this example, it is 7 to 8. So producing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units of labor up to that point, you're getting more product by doing that. Then if you add an 8th worker, you lose product. And that's because this unit or this person or this hour, there's nothing to be done because all the capital's been used up. It's a fixed number of plants that you're adding variable labor to. And so there's no work for this person to be done. And actually he or she is so unproductive that you lose product, because it's like, I mean, you're putting so many people in a factory or on a website or whatever. Okay, so normally the first stages of production are you get increasing returns, and then the second stage you get diminishing returns, which means that you're getting increasing returns at a decreasing rate. And then the third stage is you get negative returns, and that's the point when you don't want to add any more labor, because each additional marginal unit is actually taking product away. Okay, so this is just an example, and the number of units in which these things occur will depend on the industry and the firm and the factory, whatever. But this process always occurs. You always get something like this, where the initial amounts of labor give increasing returns. Stage 2, they get increasing returns at a decreasing rate. And stage 3, you get negative returns. So this is the concept of diminishing returns, is that the marginal unit of labor is not the same. So it depends on where you are in the production process. And usually going from, if you have no labor and you add one, you're going to get super productivity out of that first unit and so on. But once you get to the point at which returns become negative, then each marginal unit takes away production. Okay, and so this should make sense. You can apply this to really any industry. So if you're thinking of like think of like a restaurant. So if you're looking at a restaurant and your labor is variable in the short run, and okay, so the plant things in a restaurant are like the restaurant itself, the building. Then maybe the other things that go into the plants are like the ovens, the stoves, the stuff like that. All right, and so those are the things that make up the plant in the restaurant. Okay, so if you have no labor working, then nothing's being produced, right? So you have zero. Then if you add one unit of labor, or 1 hour, that person, he or she produces a ton of stuff from zero to whatever, because they're very productive in the kitchen. Then you had two labors, two people or three people, and so on. But once you get up to like I don't know, 100 people in the kitchen, that 101 person isn't going to be productive at all because there's nothing to do. There's not enough ovens, not enough stoves, not enough stuff to do, and so you're forcing them into a fixed resource situation, and therefore at that point that additional person in the kitchen is negatively productive. All right, so that's the idea here. Okay, so this is the whole concept of diminishing returns, and it all has to do with the fact that uh, changes in labor on the margin depend on where you are in the production process. So starting off with increasing returns, stage two is diminishing marginal returns, where the product is increasing at a decreasing rate, and then negative returns, stage three, where each additional unit is taking away productivity. Okay, so that makes sense. So everybody can explain uh, diminishing returns on a napkin now over spring break. Okay, so we've talked so far about short run versus long run, about short run relationships, specifically the marginal product and how that relates to diminishing returns. And now let's move on to the cost side. So let's look at slide 13, which will show us total fixed costs, total variable costs, and total cost. Okay, so slide 13. Okay, so these are the in general the specific types of costs that a firm might face. So you can pretty much break it down into two portions. So fixed cost and variable cost. So fixed costs are the costs that don't vary with output. So this is like the initial investment cost. So um, if we're looking at the restaurant again, or some example like that, then the fixed cost would be like building the restaurant, buying the kitchen, buying the ovens, buying the stove, stuff like that, buying the food. So all that doesn't depend on output. You got to spend that investment cost before you start your business. So these things, think of the fixed cost as like the initial cost or the initial investment cost you got to spend before you start even producing. Okay, variable costs are costs that vary with output, and because we're in the short run, the only thing that goes into the variable cost is labor. Okay, so variable costs in the short run consist of labor costs only. So think of all the other stuff that goes into the business as you had to spend that to start, and the things that change with output in terms of the short run are just labor. So you've already spent the investment costs, but this stuff depends on how much output you produce. So this is gone. You've already spent this on the building, on the kitchen, on the ovens, on the stoves. The variable cost, that depends on how much output you produce. If you want to produce more output, you got to spend more. All right, so this cost depends exactly or directly with how much output you decide to produce. Okay, then obviously total cost is you add the two together. So total cost consists of total fixed costs, and total variable costs. So if you add your fixed costs, your investment costs, and your variable costs, depending on how much output you're producing, then that's your total cost. So how much you spend to start, and then how much you spend on labor. Okay, average cost. So average cost on slide 14 is going to show, like, depending on how much output we're producing, what does the cost look like for each of these things. So average fixed cost, average variable cost, and average total cost. Okay, so think of these as per unit or average cost. And so these are very important because you can tell what your specific cost is based on how much output you. It's like if you produce 10 units, what's the fixed cost at that point, and what's the variable cost, what's the total cost, and what's the marginal cost. So depending on how much output you produce, you can see what your average cost is or per unit cost is. So average fixed cost is just the total fixed cost divided by output, or Q. Q is output. Okay, so if total fixed cost is 100, you produce 10, then your average fixed cost is 10. All right, average variable cost is the total variable cost divided by Q. Okay, so what's the per unit average cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost, and the average total cost is total cost divided by Q. Okay, so basically you're just taking all these things, total fixed cost, total variable cost, total cost, and dividing that by Q because that tells you what the cost is based on how many units of production you produce. Okay, and then marginal cost, this is going to be important in the coming chapters. This is if you change output by 1 unit, what's the resulting change in total cost? Okay, so this will depend on where you are in the production process, but wherever you are, if you produce one more unit, what's the resulting change in total cost? So always the change on the margin when you add one more unit, or I guess if you take away a unit, what's the change in total cost? But changing output by 1 unit, what's the resulting change in the margin for total cost? That's your marginal cost. Okay, oh, I guess we did marginal cost on slide 14. Um, okay, slide 15 is going to show us the short run production cost. Or an example of this. Okay. Okay, so what we've done here is we've defined these terms, the short run production cost, we've defined the per unit or average cost, and then let's look at a little example, and then we're going to look at a graph of how this might show up on a graph. Okay, so we define those terms, and this is a nice example of what those might look like based on some hypothetical production cost scenario. So hopefully you can see this, but column 1 is total product, so 1 unit, 2 units, so on. Okay, you can see the total fixed cost is always the same because we've spent it and it doesn't change with output. So total cost is 100. Whether we produce 0 units, 2 units, 3 units, it's always 100. Total variable cost depends on how much output we produce. So you can see that if you produce nothing, there's no cost. If you produce 1, it's 90. If you produce 72, it's 170. Okay, so it depends this on how much output you produce. And total cost is just this plus this. Total fixed cost plus total variable cost is your total cost. So depending on how much output you produce, just add this item, and that is your total cost. All right, then column 5, average fixed costs. All you got to do is take the fixed cost and divide it by the level of product you're producing. So average fixed cost, take the fixed cost, divide by that. So 100 divided by 1 is 100. 100 divided by 2, when you produce 2 units, is 50. Okay, so this is just total fixed cost divided by total product Q. All right, then column 6 is average variable cost. Average variable cost is just the total variable cost divided by Q. So take the total variable cost and divide it by Q, depending here. So 0 divided by 0, nothing. 90 divided by 1, 90. 170 divided by 2, 85, and so on. So take that and divide it by that. Average total cost is take the total cost and divide it by Q. All right, so 100 divided by 0, 190 divided by 1, and so on. And then over here, the last column, column 8, is the marginal cost. So what is the resulting change in cost when you add an additional unit? So there's nothing if you have 0, but if you go from 0 to 1, see the change in total cost is going from 100 to 190, so the change is 90. If you go from 1 to 2, you go from 190 to 270, and the change is 80. So see how the marginal cost depends on where you are, but adding a unit of production, this is the resulting change in your total cost. Okay, now we're going to look at something we're going to see a bunch of times in the coming chapters. It's a graph of cost curves. So we're basically going to graph these 4 things: average variable cost, average fixed cost, average total cost, and marginal cost. Okay, and so the graph's going to look different depending on the example and the industry, but you're always going to see something kind of like this, where if you plot the points we just calculated. All right, so we defined all of our average or per unit costs. We have an example of what those are here. Columns 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right, if we just plot these numbers and the output, it's going to look like this, or in this example. Okay, so all we did here is we put the total product on the x-axis, right? 1 units, 2 units, 3 units of output Q. Okay, and we plotted these curves. So we plotted this point at total product of 1. That's the average fixed cost, that's the average variable cost, and that's the average total cost. At a total product of 2, that's the average fixed cost, that's the average variable cost, and that's the average total cost. So we plotted all these points at each total product. And those curves, if you connect the dots, it looks like this. Okay, so you can see how kind of each of those things, the red line is your average total cost, and the average total cost declines as you get more output, because like if you just produce 1 unit, your fixed cost is so high that the average cost is high. So as you produce more, on average, it goes down. All right. Then here's your average fixed cost. So see how if you produce 1 unit, it's a ton. Like if you're looking at the restaurant example, if you spend all that money on the fixed cost and only produce, one pizza or one burger, whatever, then your average fixed cost is super high because you haven't produced much with the depending on the total cost. But if you produce more and more, then that average cost gets leveled out, right? And so you really can't see how you're doing it as a business until you produce enough output to kind of level out the average to level out the fixed cost. Okay, so if you're only going to produce a few meals or burgers or pizzas, whatever, then you're not going to recoup the fixed cost. But see how the average fixed cost kind of levels out as you produce more and more. Average variable cost. So that goes down here and then up here. So see how if we look at the chart for average variable cost. Okay, it goes from 90, goes down to 75, and then starts going back up again. So this is the point at which average variable cost reaches its minimum, and then it starts to increase again. So all we did was plot these points. Okay, and then marginal cost initially goes down and then minimizes and then goes up and keeps going up. And so look here, if you plot these points, it'll look something like that, where it goes from 90 to 80 to 70 to 60 and then starts going up and up and up. Okay, and the reason why that marginal cost changes is because you've reached the point here, right? So when your marginal cost flips, that's the point where each additional unit is less productive than before. So on the margin, your costs are increasing continuously. So after this point, when you go to the diminishing returns section, your marginal cost is going to increase at every unit because see how each unit is less productive than it was before, and your marginal cost is going to increase. All right, and so yeah, we're going to look at this little cost curve graph for a bunch of different industries and different examples, but this is kind of the starting point where you can see that depending on how much output you're producing, what's your fixed cost, what's your variable cost, what's your total cost, what's your marginal cost. Okay. Okay, everyone good so far? Any questions on these concepts or the cost curves? What this stuff implies? All right. So, what do we learn here? So we learned the distinction between short run and long run. In the short run, you have a fixed plant, but you can change labor. In the long run, everything can change, including the plant and entry and exit. Okay, we learned about total product, marginal product, and average product. Make sure you understand that the diminishing returns concept and that graph there. And make sure you know how the average fixed cost, average variable cost, and average total cost kind of come out in the marginal cost, and how those kind of look on the cost curve graph, because we're going to look at those in different industries in chapters 7, 8, and 9. So there's 3 pretty quick videos that I'd recommend watching to kind of give some more explanation on the cost curves. So if you get a chance, you can look at parts 2, 3, and 4. They're only, 1, 2, and 3. I think they're only like 5 minutes each. So take a look at those short run cost curve videos if you get a chance. All right, let's look at some examples. Okay, so number 1 is which of the following is short run and which of the following are long run adjustments. Okay, so make sure that in these little simple examples you can see why it's short run or why it's long run. So A, Wendy's builds a new restaurant. So restaurant is a type of plant. So remember that goes into the plant thing, which is fixed in the short run. So if you're adjusting a plant or any type of plant, any capital adjustment, that's a long run adjustment. So that's a long run. That's a long run move. Okay, so Wendy's could not build a new restaurant in the short run. They can only hire more workers, less workers, stuff like that. All right. Harley Davidson's corporation hires 200 more production workers. Okay, so that's just a change in labor, adding more units of labor. That's a short run adjustment. You can do that in the short run. A farmer increases the amount of fertilizer used on his corn crop. All right, so this one has to be clarified that this is just um, the fertilizer change is just a labor change essentially, or this is what the interpretation is. Okay, so don't think of this as a plant. Think of this as just like more labor hours going around the crops and implementing fertilizer. So if you can qualify this as a labor change, then that's a short run change. Yeah. And then D, and Alcoa aluminum plant adds a third shift of workers. Okay, that's a labor adjustment. That's a short run adjustment. That's short run period. Okay, number 2. Uh, let's complete the table by calculating marginal product and average product. All right, so I did this here, and I did this in Excel. So I'll show you both. In the old school days, I would do this up on the whiteboard and mess up the math, but I don't have to do that this time. Okay, so you have this many. These are the units of labor, and this is the total product, and this is the change in marginal product and average product. So you're given 1 through 8 units of labor. You're given the total product, and you have to know based on that how to calculate marginal product and how to calculate average product. So marginal product is just the change in total product by adding 1 more unit of labor, and average product is just depending on where you are, total product divided by the units of labor. Okay, so C, if we have no labor, then everything's 0. All right, and then so this column was given, and this column was given. Okay, and the marginal product is the change from going to, so if you go from 1 unit, 0 units to 1 unit, you go from 0 to 15, the change is 15. If you go from 1 to 2, then you go from 15 to 34, the change is 34 minus 15, which is 19. If you go from 2 to 3, you go from 34 to 51, the change is 51 minus 34, which is 17. So see how each time we go along, the marginal product is the change in total product from changing 1 unit of labor. Okay, and then average product, just take total product and divide it by the units of labor. So 15 divided by 1, 15, 34 divided by 2, 17, and so on. So you're just taking that simple formula and applying it based on where you are in the units of labor row. Okay, and if you look at, I did this in Excel if you wanted to look at the example. Okay, so this is example is chapter 6. Okay, so I put the units of labor here in column A. I put the total product here, and you can see that I put a little formula just to show you how simple the marginal product is. So it's just the change. All right, go from 0 to 1, the change is 15 minus 0. Okay, you go from 1 to 2, the change is 34 minus 15, and all the way along. All right, and then it looks like going from 7 to 8, you go from 83 to 82, and that must be the point at which you hit that negative returns, where adding the 8th unit of labor was not only less productive, but it was unproductive. Okay, and average product is just total product divided by units of labor. So if you're producing 1 unit, you're producing 15. If you're using 1 unit of labor, you're producing 15 units on average. If you're using 2 units, you're producing 34 divided by 2, 17 units, and so on. All right, so just applying those simple definitions to this information that was given here. All right, so everyone sees how we calculate marginal product and average product, yeah, based on a little example of data. Okay, actually, let me do one more thing here. Okay, so if I wanted to illustrate you the concept of diminishing returns like this. Okay, so see how this top graph here is total product versus units of labor. Okay, if I were to put that on a graph in the example I just got, you're hopefully going to see something like this. So let's see if we get that. So we should get at the first stage, initially we get increasing returns, and then stage 2 we get diminishing returns, and then stage 3 negative returns. Okay, so let's see if we get that. All right, I'm going to take units of labor and total product and make a little graph. Okay, you don't have to do this, but I'm just trying to illustrate based on the example that we get diminishing returns. There you go. So there we see that initially increasing returns, then increasing returns at a decreasing rate, so diminishing returns, and then after 0.7, negative returns. Okay? So it all comes full circle. You can see the concept of diminishing returns by just graphing your total product with regards to your units of labor. Okay, so this is units of labor, this is total product, increasing at a decreasing rate, then decreasing. All right, number 3, we got a big chart. A firm has fixed cost of 60 and variable costs is indicated below. So let's complete the table. So we're given the total product, the total fixed cost, and the total variable cost, and we got to calculate the rest. Okay, so the total product goes from 0 to 10. Fixed cost is always 60, right? No matter how much product we produce. Total variable cost was given, but it depends on how much product is produced. Okay, total cost is just this plus this. Average fixed cost is just take the total fixed cost and divide it by output, total product. Average variable cost, take the total variable cost and divide that by output, Q. Average total cost, you can either add these two things together, or you can take total cost and divide that by total product. And marginal cost, see that is every time you add one more product, what's the change in total cost? So you're going from 0 to 1, you go from 60 to 105, the change is 45. Going from 1 to 2, the change is 145 minus 105, which is 40. Okay, and so I did this all in Excel to see it a little bit easier. Okay, so all we had to do is we were given this stuff, and we had to calculate this stuff based on the formulas and definitions we had just learned. All right, total cost. just add total fixed cost and total variable cost. That's your total cost, right? No matter where you are. Okay, average fixed cost, we just take the definition, which is fixed cost divided by total product, right? Okay, average variable cost, what we're doing is taking the total variable cost and dividing that by output, all right, at each stage. All right, average total cost, take the total cost and divide that by output on what's your per unit total cost. Okay, and marginal cost is each time you change output by 1 unit, total product, what's the corresponding change in total cost? So see, we go from 0 to 1, we go from 60 to 105. The difference is 45. If we go from 1 to 2, the change is 145 minus 105, which is a marginal cost of 40. So marginal cost decreases, then increases after that diminishing return stage. Okay, so we see how to, when we're given total product, total fixed cost, and total variable cost, we now know how to calculate total cost, average fixed cost, average total cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost. Yeah? So if we're given this, we can apply the simple definitions and calculate this stuff. Okay, let me see if I can make a little cost curve graph and give us something that looks similar to what we saw in the slides there. Okay, so I showed you a cost curve graph, which was basically a graph of these 5, 6, 7, 8. Based on our example, we just calculated 5, 6, 7, 8, all the average per unit cost. So if I make a graph of what we just did, I can hopefully show you something like this, where you get your marginal cost, average total cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost. It looks something like this. Let's see if I can produce that. Okay, so what I want to do is show you at each product, what's our average per unit cost of each of these things. So let me see if I select this and this. Okay, so yeah, it looks something like this. I'm gonna have to start it at 1 unit because it looks weird here. Okay, so yeah, we can see that it looks, yeah, so we got a graph. So I click on that, I graphed at each product or each, the per unit cost of average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost, and marginal cost. Okay, so it looks similar to what we saw on the slide, but this is Q. All right, and this is the dollar amount of the cost. All right, so yeah, doesn't that look pretty similar to what we saw in this slide here? All right, so average total cost kind of does that. Average variable cost kind of does that. Average fixed cost always decreases because you're leveling out your fixed cost, and marginal cost is going to dip, then jump after the point at which we hit diminishing returns. Okay, see that? Whereas marginal cost, so here's marginal cost is declining, and then here's the point at which it switches from increasing returns to diminishing returns. And once you hit diminishing returns, each additional unit is more costly in the margin because you're losing productivity, right? Each worker is less productive than before. Okay. All right. Questions on any of these terms before we close this Excel file? All right, so number 4, another example. Here we go. Imagine you have some workers and some handheld computers that you can use to take inventory to warehouse. So this is going to illustrate diminishing returns. So there are diminishing returns to taking inventory. If one worker uses one computer, he can inventory 100 items per hour. 2 workers sharing a computer can inventory together 150 items per hour. 3 workers sharing a computer together can inventory 160 items per hour, and 4 workers less than 160 per hour. So if computers cost 100 each, and you must pay each worker 25 bucks an hour. So if you assign 1 worker per computer, what's the cost of inventorying a single item? What if we assign 2 workers or 3? And if that's the case, how many workers per computer should we assign if we want to minimize the cost of inventorying a single item? So we're trying to hit the point, we're trying to find this point. Okay, so basically we're trying to find this point here in which the marginal worker adds productivity, but it's less productive than before. So we're trying to find this point. Okay, so the cost per item consists of the computer cost and the labor cost. So there's 2 things. The fixed cost, well, I guess they're both just computer cost and labor cost, where the computer cost is like the plant cost and labor cost is the labor cost. Okay, so the 2 costs divided by how many items are inventoried is essentially the general formula. So the total cost divided by how many items were inventoried is the cost per item inventoried. All right, so the cost per item, if we do 1 worker per computer, okay, so the cost is the computer cost of 100 plus 25 bucks to pay that worker for the hour. So that's a cost of 125. And the problem says that 1 worker on 1 computer can inventory 100 items in 1 hour. So that's 125 divided by 100. And the cost per item, I guess, is $1.25 per item if you put 1 worker per computer. All right, if you put 2 workers per computer, you're gonna pay $100 for the computer, $25 for each person per hour for labor. So the total cost is $150. And the problem said you can, if you put 2 workers per computer, they can do 150 items per hour. Right? So that means 150 divided by 150 is the cost here for 2 workers is $1 per item. Okay, so that seems more cost effective than 1. What about 3? So let's put 3 workers per computer. Pay for the computer of 100, then each worker gets 25, and the total cost is 175. And together, 3 workers on one computer can inventory 160. All right, so that gives us 175 divided by 160, which is about $1.09. So you can see what happens. This is 1 worker, then it minimizes here. We hit the turning point, and then it's gonna, each time we add more workers, we're going to add additional labor costs to the computer, and you're going to get less productivity. So if we want to minimize the cost of inventorying a single item, we should assign 2 workers per computer to do that. All right, so it makes, I mean, it's just an example, but it makes sense because, like, if you're trying to inventory stuff, you have 1 worker, all right, it's hard for him or her to, input stuff in the computer and get the items at the same time. If you have 2 workers, one person can be on the computer and the other person can be getting the items and reporting back. If you had 3 workers, what's the third person going to do? So there's only so much if you add more workers, where it seems like the best way to do it is have one worker on the computer, 1 worker getting the items and reporting back to the person on the computer, and then any more workers adding to that group are going to be less productive than they were before. So this is the optimal cost strategy. All right. Okay, so for this chapter, again, kind of building blocks and just key terms and definitions and graphs for the coming chapters, but make sure you know the distinction between short run and long run. Make sure you understand the total products, average product, marginal product, and how that concept of diminishing returns applies and what the graph kind of looks like, and then the total costs and the average cost and the marginal cost and kind of what that cost curve graph is going to look like depending, kind of like this. Okay, so basically the key things here in this graph were short run versus long run. This concept of diminishing returns, how the marginal change changes depending on how much output you or how much labor you put in. And then these definitions, especially the per unit ones, and the marginal cost and how that kind of looks typically like this. Okay, so that's all the key terms and examples here for chapter 6. Any questions on any of this material or what any of this stuff means? All right. Well, there's no homework for this chapter, so you don't have to worry about that over the spring break. And I think we might finish a little early tonight if that's okay with everyone. Um, this went quicker than I thought, and all right. So that's all I had for chapter 6. All right. So let me know if you have any questions on that or if you read the chapter or whatever. Make sure you watch these videos if you get a chance. And so let me just, all right, so I'll get your grades updated soon for chapters 1 through 5. So make sure you get chapter 5 homework in today here in the discussion forum if you haven't done that already. And again, no homework for chapter 6. Okay, make sure you get me your exam emailed to me today if you haven't done that. And I'll get your exams graded probably this weekend or so. And then no class next week, right? Spring break. Okay, and then in 2 weeks, we're gonna do chapter 7 and chapter 8. We'll do that in our next meeting in 2 weeks, that Monday. So this chapter, because there's no homework and because it's just a bunch of definitions, not too bad, right? Chapter 6. I do think that the next meeting, when we do chapter 7 and chapter 8, because they kind of go together, this will be longer. So expect to be here at least 2 hours next time. Probably be one of our longer meetings, but shouldn't be too bad. But anyway, and then you'll have 2 homework assignments or 2 homework chapters next time in 2 weeks. So just prepare for that. So a little bit more stuff next meeting, but you have nothing to do over this. You won't have any work over the spring break, and whenever you get your midterm in, you can just take a 2-week break from this class. All right, so I think that's about it. If you're reading the chapters, we're doing these 2 chapters next time, but just get your exam in if you haven't done that already, and no homework over spring break. So we'll go ahead and I think wrap it up a little bit early tonight because I got everything done I wanted to for chapter 6. And let me know if you have any questions, but I think that's all I got. I will see everyone in 2 weeks, and everyone have a good, safe spring break. And yeah, thanks for joining, and I'll see you in 2 weeks, same time.
Thanks, Professor. Have a good spring break.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good
Thank you.
spring break.
You too.